Okay, awesome. Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, October 21st. This is the County and Regional Governance Study Committee, and we're at is this our third meeting, right? Yeah, third meeting. And we're going to do a little bit of a review of our charge and follow up with questions with Tim. And I did also want to give you some updates from where we're at, because one of the things that was supposed to be on the agenda today was further information about any work we might be doing with UVM. And we haven't been able to get everything together to work those details out. So Mike and I met last week with JFO and Catherine and from JFO, Catherine Benham and Maria are going to put together sort of a draft scope of work. And then Mike and Catherine and Maria and I are going to meet with Tricia Coates and the professor whose name I'm forgetting at the moment to go over that and see we have a draft. So it will be next meeting that we'll have more details. And once we have a document, I'll make sure that you all get it so you can see what we're thinking about doing. And then next meeting, we'll okay it and make sure the committee's all okay with them moving forward with doing some of this work. Mostly the research background, data collection, looking at sort of the state of where we are and options, models around the country and doing some research for us. And so we'll make sure that the scope of work includes what the committee is interested in and also, importantly, what the statutes, session law is asking us to do to make sure that we cover that and do it within our timeline and our budget. So that's the status of that, because I know that was something we had thought was going to be on this agenda and it's not. So Tim, if you want to come over and tell us about any follow-up and then looking at the scope in the statute, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So for the record, my name is Tim Duffin, Legislative Counsel. I would be happy to take questions on the updated memo I provided last time regarding introductory notes on county governance in Vermont, or any other general questions that council may have. Aside from that, I'm happy to just kind of perhaps refresh the memory of the committee as to the charge, what was before in Senate Bill 159. That is our enabling authority here. So let me just maybe jump in there. So
do you want to just put it up on the screen? Are you able to put the scope of what the committee is supposed to study?
Yes, and I shared that with Mike Farrat, and I think it will be posted. Okay. I think it's posted already. I think you can share it. The version I've had posted is highlighted. I just kind of use a reference to see exactly what and when things need to happen in this committee.
So it's posted on the committee's website, documents and handouts under today, and you want the enabling authority to highlight one?
Perfect. So we can see here there's some kind of preambulatory language in the creation, section 1A. And this committee, being the County and Regional Governance Study Committee, is created to address local government capacity challenges, enhance and optimize public safety, regional collaboration and planning, efficient, equitable, and transparent public resource allocation, and effective regional public services for individuals and municipalities. See, we can then skip down to the bottom of page 1, breaking to page 2, where we have the powers and duties in 1C here more explicitly laid out. So 1, the committee shall study and make recommendations to the General Assembly on how to improve the structure and organization of county and regional government, including A, enhancement and optimization of public safety. B, enhancement of regional collaboration and planning. C, efficient, equitable, and transparent allocation of public resources. D, promotion of effective regional public services for individuals and municipalities. E, clarification of the role and oversight of elected county officials and their departments. F, reduction of duplicated public services and promotion of opportunities for intermunicipal collaboration. G, balance of availability and cost of services across municipalities in each county. H, mechanisms of county and regional government structures in other states. And I, impact of climate change and resiliency on the maintenance of public infrastructure, delivery of regional government services, and coordination of regional emergency planning. Going on to the next page, 3, we have the ability of this committee to contract with one or more consultants to assist research and preparation of the report, and for any other assistance the committee's work deemed necessary by the committee, what Senator Hardy was referring to earlier. And then E, we have highlighted the report date. Again, this is November 1st, 2025, so not this upcoming November, but 1 year away essentially. And I think that's probably it for right now, unless you'd like me to kind of go into any.
No, I think that's good. I just think it's important that we remember all the things that we're supposed to do. I know a number of people are really interested in public safety, and that's certainly an issue that we want to cover. And I think our next meeting, we're going to try to hone in on public safety a little bit. But there are a lot of other things, planning, public services more broadly, role of elected officials and oversight of those officials, and the different types of structures and municipal services that we definitely can't lose sight of. And then, of course, what's coming to a head in a lot of cases is flood recovery and how local governments are able to do that, and the interplay between state, local, and federal governments. So just trying to make sure that we continue to address the full scope of our charge. And are there questions for Tim on this or anything at the moment? Okay. There is a new memo from Tim that will go over about intermunicipal agreements that will be later in the agenda. And Doug, are you prepared to talk a little bit about that memo? I forgot to reach out to you, but the memo on county funds.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks. I also just wanted to, I was just trying to pull them all up as we were talking. There have been some recent press coverage of the county's work, and I'll send all those links to you. 3 local papers have written stories about our work. And I've been getting a lot of emails, and I'm assuming Mike has as well, and maybe you all have, with people who are interested and have their own bent on what they think we should look at. So definitely want to keep track of what the conversation is out in the state about our work, and how we might need to address it or adjust what we're doing to cover everything people have interest in. Okay. We are way ahead of schedule now because we don't have our first witness until 10:30. So are there any other things that people want to bring up at this moment? Okay, then I think if Matt is not, go ahead.
Just one other thing. There was thank you. There was a memorandum referenced in the 7 days story that I did not, that I haven't seen, from the interim Secretary of Administration.
About county, about the
funding and the challenges with the funding. I thought we might be getting that today.
That's later on in the agenda.
Okay, because
that's the thing I just asked Doug about.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
So it's the ARPA funds memo. It was actually from a previous secretary. I guess she was technically interim. But we'll talk about that later in the meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I guess we have
Well, I
time.
didn't see it on
We have
the-
time now if we want to do it, we can shift it to the, unless you're not ready yet. Doug?
I am, Madam Chair. I believe the 7 days reference both I think that reference was for the Act 118 report, because that was issued under Secretary Clark. And that's what mentioned the review of competitive awards
Oh, okay.
and how we, at least at a quick review, appear to be underrepresented in New England. And I can, of course, talk about that report as well.
Okay, yeah, if we could, I think I have seen that, but it's not on our, yeah, do you have a copy that you could send to Mike of that memo that we
Yes,
can
I can send that.
take a look at? That would be great. So since we have time, actually, why don't we talk about that county funds memo that was supposed to be at the end of our agenda now, and we can, it is posted on the committee's website, so we should be able to pull that up. And Doug, if you want to go ahead and tell us, this is the letter to Secretary Yellen. Oh, thank you, Tim. Sorry.
Doug, is the best way on the screen?
Yes, please.
And this is actually the analysis that Tim did last time about the sort of authority of county government in Vermont, and he referenced a court case, and this memo is basically using that same basis. That's why this came up. So go ahead.
Yes. For the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state. Yes, this memo was issued from Secretary Young in 2021 to Secretary Yellen. Essentially, when the American Rescue Plan Act funds were passed, they included $1.25 billion for Vermont. $1.049 billion was for the state, and that went through the legislative process to create over 80 programs at the state level. Another 120 million, apologies, not precise there, it might be 121. But approximately 120 million was designed to go through county government around the country. And then about 60 million was intended to go directly to municipalities. I think they call them non-entitlement units or NEUs at the federal level. Generally speaking, those were the census designated towns in Vermont. It's not the 251 or the 246, but it was some other list. I think it was like 242 units that the census recognized for that money to go to. So it was a little bit, of course, like everything else, a little bit different. And Treasury was going to distribute the 60 million to the towns and the 120 million to Vermont county government. So the administration intervened by sending this memorandum and saying, you know, under the American Rescue Plan Act, there was a mechanism for if a state did not have true county government or general purpose government, then the funds would be could be handled two different ways. One, they could be just distributed to the non-entitlement units directly to the towns, and that's the route that we chose to go. Or the state could apply to receive those funds as part of the state's award and then distribute them out. Because of the timing of this and the need to move quickly with the short time frame of ARPA, the administration did go with the path of the towns, sending the money directly to the towns. I think it took us about 6 months to work through this with Treasury. From our perspective, it was pretty clear that Vermont did not have general purpose government, and you know, looking back to that same case law that Tim cited, and we were able ultimately to use this memo and this argument to get the Treasury to redistribute the funds. So I think I mentioned it at the last meeting, mostly as a point of awareness of this is an area where kind of the rubber hit the road in the last 3 years of seeing that gap. And again, we didn't lose any money because of this. But because it was distributed to all of the towns based on a per capita count, you didn't have the opportunity that other states had where their county received the money. And then that county could look at their geographic region and make decisions about where to invest within their county footprint into the communities that needed the most assistance. Every town kind of had to make that decision by themselves. So I think it pretty dramatically changed the investment pattern for $120 million, which is, for a state our size, a very significant amount of money.
It also, I would assume, prevented that, if you think about the county, the organizations within a county that serve the entire county, but they probably didn't get invested in from the town because it would be hard to say, oh, this social service agency, we just want you to serve people from our town with our money kind of thing. So a lot of that was not done with that money. It was really very, very specific to the towns because of the inability to designate more broadly.
I think, yes, I'm sure. In general, I think a couple towns were creative and embarked on kind of newer programs with the money. But for many of the towns, it did act as, a way to replace equipment, a way to bolster the current operations, and particularly smaller towns that have been struggling to maintain operations, it ended up just going into that category. Particularly since Treasury, and I don't dispute this decision, but Treasury set the revenue replacement cap at $10 million. The revenue replacement cap spent the money essentially as if it were, with some small prohibited uses, essentially as if it were town money. So towns didn't have to create new programs, right? They could spend it on a fire truck. They could spend it on whatever they would normally spend their money on, with the exception of generally debt service or paying off old loans, et cetera. The only city in Vermont that's above the 10 million, I think, was Burlington. So every other town was able to use that revenue replacement to, and it did make it so that they were able to spend the money more easily. So it's a good thing overall. But it also means there's no standardized reporting for how the town spent the money. That's why I'm speculating as to how it was spent, because it's all just lumped into that one category of spending. And normally we would get to see what the town decided to spend it on, but you'd have to go and actually go into each town's meeting minutes to figure out how each town decided to spend their money at this point.
Oh, interesting. So there's not going to be any kind of centralized report that says this is how they spent it?
No, unfortunately, it'll be 170 million or so was as revenue replacement.
Wow.
And it will have maybe a couple of anecdotal examples of how towns chose to spend the money if they supply that information. But generally speaking, we won't get to see much detail on how the towns at the macro level spent that $180 million.
I mean, so that sounds like something though, that if we do have an entity that does have like interns and support, that's like a project we could put somebody on to at least get a chunk of that data from towns if we wanted to. Because it's all publicly available. It's just, it would be a chore, and it's a matter of like the ability to reach out to the towns or look through their minutes and see. Because I know like City of St. Albans spent it on a number of different things, including like economic development. There was like grant sharing with businesses who were, fixing up storefronts and signs, and some other things in the neighborhoods too that they did to clean up blighted properties. But it wasn't like there was one thing, you'd have to kind of.
Right. That would be a big project. I don't know if that's the purview of this committee, but it still would be interesting to know what everybody spent it on. So when I was talking to the various reporters who were doing the stories on this committee's work, one of them said to me, wouldn't it be easier to just ask the federal government to change the structure of how they do things? Literally, that was a question I got. And I was like, really? Wait, are you kidding me? so that, you know, because this memo basically asked the feds, could we have an exception? I think that's where it came from, was, well, we asked them once and they did it for us. Can't we just ask them all the time, every single time we deal with the federal government, to make an exception for Vermont? And you deal with them all the time. I mean, have you found that to be a viable route?
So yes and no. FEMA, I think the FEMA process is a great example. That most federal structures are set up so that they can work with the towns. They generally will try to describe municipality in a broad enough sense that a town can participate. So it's generally not an issue of eligibility. It always ends up being an issue of that community having the resources to engage with the federal program. And we've had some luck, like USDA Rural Development has been an excellent partner, and they used $1 million to partner with VLCT to create more support for financial processes at the town level. That program actually was just able to launch. The staff are on board now. They're going to be helping towns, you know, review their capital processes and really get their finances in order. And so with the FEMA process, like, they engage with every last town, and we see a huge spectrum of how quickly towns move through that process. And it can be based on individual personalities or expertise. But in general, the towns that pull on resources to deal with FEMA just move faster through that, and they get their projects obligated. So it really just comes down to resources at the end of the day. And that's a situation where FEMA is actually going to pay for the resources. But some communities are so under-resourced, they can't even figure out how to bring on the additional resources, even if someone else is paying for them.
So just to reiterate your point, it's not an issue of eligibility, it's an issue of capacity, basically.
Essentially.
Yeah, and that's ultimately why we're leaving money on the table, probably, is
Right.
capacity issues.
In many programs, they look at the overall impact and the cost benefit. And when you're able to draw the lines around a larger region, you can draw your own lines within your area to make a stronger cost benefit argument. And that's what I see often in many programs, is that that larger scale just ends up winning the award.
And I mean, I read somewhere about the difference between what other New England states are getting in the Inflation Reduction Act money versus what Vermont is getting it. Is that the same kind of thing? Is that they're able to sort of have a broader scale of what the money can be used for, and therefore they're more successful in their applications?
Generally, that's what we think we've seen. The federal system is opaque enough that even spending a couple of weeks doing the research, we're still not 100% confident we're seeing all the awards properly. So it's possible that we've missed some things, but in general, it does appear other New England states that have more regional perspectives are winning more awards.
Okay. Senator Harrison.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So a couple of different things. This is really helpful to see what happened during ARPA, because I was in town government at that time, and from that vantage point, it was, you know, really challenging because things were changing quickly, and what we were going to expect was, you know, that changed multiple times, and the rules changed multiple times. And it's helpful to know that, I just want to be clear, what I'm hearing is that there was a special rule that existed in the federal action that did allow for towns to receive the funds instead of counties. And it looks like this letter was Vermont's request to use that rule.
Yes, the rule was written, well, actually, luckily it wasn't a rule, it was a section of the ARPA Act itself. And I believe, I don't know if I could prove this, but I believe it may be another example of Vermont benefiting from the wisdom of Senator Leahy. And I think some other small states and some other states with unique structures, I think, did work together collaboratively on that section of the American Rescue Plan Act that allowed for an alternative process if government wasn't, you know, like you see in 40 other states, right? And then one other thing to mention on the ARPA money and the data and everything like that, there are still some towns that are working through that decision-making process. They have until December 31st of this year. And it's, so that deadline runs out soon, but it also means the final distributions and the final decisions will have to be made by the end of this calendar year. So next year is a good time to start really looking at that because you'll have the complete list. It's not complete yet.
Right, and so that's what I wanted to suggest is that if we do think that this would be helpful, and it will be helpful, or I mean, any data is useful, but if the effort of getting this data out is more than its usefulness, you know, that I think that's something that we should talk about because ARPA was a very unusual situation, especially with the rules changing and then being able to use the revenue replacement. So then it was essentially like revenue sharing years ago. So it really is an unusual animal, but I would suggest that we just talk to VLCT and see if they have a way that they could just get the information from the towns directly, if that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I don't know that it's directly relevant to this committee.
I'm skeptical.
Doug might want to know it for his work, I'm not sure, but I think it's just a good example of money being distributed and used in a way that's maybe not as regionally strategic as possible.
Right, and that's the other thing I just wanted to bring up is the economic development districts, they do work in a regional way and they are successful in getting, I mean, down in our area, they're successful in getting federal grants and just funding because it's regional. And so that is definitely a valid point.
Yeah.
You know, I think in listening to Mr. Farnham, I think it's going to be important as we go through this process to kind of compare what the cost is going to be and how it works in regards to the difference between a county form of governance and an increase in maybe administrative costs to do a similar thing. I mean, it sounds like you folks don't have the capabilities of working with every town to understand what they need. And so again, I think as we go, it's going to be important to weigh the cost difference of a full-blown county governance structure and maybe some increases in administrative costs to see if they can't do the same sort of thing, but at a lot less cost.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly one of the things that we talked to JFO about, working with this potentially UVM to try to do both analysis of how much money might we be leaving on the table by not having a sound county government or regional government structure, or, you know, sound isn't the right word, but comprehensive or whatever. And then how much more does our current system potentially cost? Because we have overlay of lots of different regional government systems versus if we kind of streamlined it. So that getting at the cost benefit analysis, I think, is something hopefully we'll be able to do with the with UVM, with the help of JFO as well. Because I agree, I think we need to figure out that, you know, that comparison. Yeah.
And just to follow up too, I mean, you know, it might be interesting to see what towns in particular spent the money on, but on the other hand, I've got enough confidence in the towns to do what they feel is best with whatever they got, you know. I know even some said, we really don't need this, you know, and maybe if that was the case, if there was a process to consider a neighboring town as far as something more than they need, they would be willing to say, okay, well, we give that up for the new fire truck for the for the Troy Fire Department, because they're a regional fire department, and Westfield doesn't have one, and, just an example.
Yeah.
So again, I wouldn't criticize at all the towns as to, what they did with the money. They, I'm sure, did the best they could and made the best decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm not sure that having that list is directly relevant to this committee. It might be just interesting for the state to know how that money was spent, because it's a good chunk of change. We're going to move on to our guest, and we can come back to this conversation later in the committee. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for your patience, Matt. We're interested in hearing from you, Matt. I am Ruth Hardy, and I chair the Government Operations Committee in the Senate, and you came and visited our committee last February, I believe, and talked to us about the Council of Governments model in Connecticut as a neighboring-ish, almost neighbor, New England state, and of similar sort of geographic size. We're really interested in how you do regional government in Connecticut. So thank you for being with us. Welcome. We'll just do our quick introduction so you know who you're talking to here. There were two of us who were on that committee earlier, but the rest of the folks are new, and so want to hear what you have to say for sure. As I said, I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I'm one of the co-chairs of this committee and the chair of the Senate GovOps Committee.
And I'm Representative Mike McCarthy. I chair House GovOps and Military Affairs, and I'm the House co-chair of our study committee. Thanks for being with us.
Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Bob Norris, Franklin County. I am on Senate GovOps, so I did hear your presentation last time, Matt, but looking forward to hearing it again.
And I'm Representative Mark Hickley. I represent the Orleans Memorial District, and I'm on Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee.
Douglas Farnham, I'm not a member of the committee. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for the state in supporting discussions.
Hi, Matt. I'm Julia Andrews. I'm a state representative representing Westford and a portion of Milton in Chittenden County.
Hi, I'm Wendy Harrison, Senator Wendy Harrison of Windham District, which is the southeast corner of the state.
So that's us. We also have our committee assistant, Mike Ferrant, who you dealt with scheduling you. And if you want to introduce yourself and what you do and just take it away. And I think you have some slides also that are on our website. But I think we can all, is it okay if we all just look at them on our screen, the slides, and then we can see Matt when he's talking. So thanks so much. Take it away.
Oh, thank you again for having me, Senator. It's wonderful to be here. Matt Hart, the Executive Director at the Capital Region Council of Governments. Senator, I do have an updated presentation. Is it okay if I use that? It's a little bit longer. I would need to share my screen.
Oh, yeah, an updated presentation is fine, but did you get those? It's not.
Yeah,
okay.
You don't have it on your end, so I would have to share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, you can share your screen, and if you wouldn't mind sending that to Mike afterwards so we can post it, that'd be great.
Okay, I certainly will be happy to do that. Just a brief introduction about myself. So I've served in local and now regional government for close to 30 years. I started as an intern back in 1995 and had the privilege of serving as town manager for two communities in Connecticut, West Hartford, which is near our capital city of Hartford, and then Mansfield, which is better known nationally as Storrs and the home to the University of Connecticut, and had started my career with the town of Windsor. Know your state pretty well, have family in Pomfret, go up quite frequently. Love your mountains and your trails and everything you have to offer. Really respect and admire the state's resiliency and how you've responded to some of the extreme weather events over the last decade or so. I think you have many lessons and best practices that you can share with other parts of the country too. So that's just a little bit about me. Oh, one last thing. I've been in this role as the executive director almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years this winter. Again, most of my career at the local government level. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Can you all see it? I'm not using the presenter mode.
Yeah, we can see that.
Can you see that fine?
Yep, thanks.
Great, okay. So regional councils of governments, you're probably somewhat familiar with the concept. I believe you've got 11 planning agencies in Vermont, and their role in many ways is similar to that of a council of governments. Our portfolio, if you will, may be a little bit broader in some circumstances. Connecticut, as you may know, we're one of 2 states, it's just us and Rhode Island, that don't have any formal county government. So we abandoned county government in 1959, 1960, and then began establishing regional planning agencies in the 60s, councils of governments in the 70s. Our organization has been around for 51, 52 years. So, you know, a little bit unique nationally. And I think sometimes, especially here in Connecticut, people conflate the term Council of Governments and the role with that of a county. And we're not a county, you know, we're different, as I'll explain, but sometimes there's some confusion around that. So councils of governments, like planning agencies, they're really a geographic framework for cities and towns to get together, to provide a set of services, talk about key issues, challenges, and opportunities, try to address things in a regional fashion. So councils of governments can also function or host what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or the MPO. That's a federal term from Federal Highway, and MPOs serve urbanized areas of with a population of 50,000 or more. And I believe you've got one in Vermont, in the Chittenden County or Chittenden region area. And I believe that planning agency also hosts the MPO, which is considered to be a best practice. So the MPO, I'll elaborate on that role as I move forward. But really, that's where you administer federal transportation planning dollars. COGS can also function, and this is a relatively new designation that my organization, the Capital Region Council of Governments, received, as an economic development district, an EDD, for the administration of economic development administration funds on behalf of the region. And I know you've got a number of regional development organizations in Vermont as well that perform that service. So looking at the capital region in particular, you know, we're the largest of the state's 9 COGs and MPOs. 7 of our COGs also host MPOs. And one, interestingly, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments hosts 2 MPOs. And one of those has municipalities in New York State. So these MPO boundaries don't necessarily, they can go outside of state boundaries. We serve 38 municipalities and a population of almost 1 million residents and a geographic region of over 1,000 square miles. So good size by Connecticut standards. And we've got a lot of diversity in the 38 municipalities that we serve. We've got small towns by Connecticut standards with populations of 5,000 people. And then we've got our capital city of Hartford with a population of approximately 130,000. The vast majority of our members are what I would classify as suburbs of Hartford. And the vast majority, 22 of the 38 towns, have the council manager form of government. And I imagine you're familiar with that. And I know it's a common form in the state of Vermont as well. Here's our mission statement. I should ask you, Senator Hardy, how much time do I have? I should have asked that at the beginning.
No, that's okay. We have you on, you have until 11:30.
Okay, okay. So when you've got questions, I'll do my best to stop periodically, but don't hesitate to just raise your voice and I'll pause. And some of these slides I'm going to touch on very quickly, others I'll spend more time on. So here's our mission statement. It talks about how we work to lead and enhance the quality of life, vibrancy, and vitality of our region. We provide a variety of services to our towns and cities, and we serve as a strong advocate for the region as well. We've got 4 core values, if you will. Work hard to be member focused, focused on the needs of our municipalities. As I tell our team here, we were formed by the towns to serve the towns. Can't lose sight of that. Work hard to be collaborative and inclusive. Want to make sure that our work is impactful, that we're performing at a high level, and we promote innovation as well. Some of our strategic priorities, we've got a strategic playbook with a set of priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. Looking in the area of governance and communications, we kind of fly under the radar a little bit, especially with the general population, councils of governments. So we're looking to promote ourselves a little bit and our role. Federal infrastructure funding has been a significant focus of ours with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the IIJA, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So we added some staff for that purpose. We've got a monthly grants newsletter, and we've brought in, let's see, I think we're a little over halfway through the 5-year BIL cycle. We've brought in a little over 62 million in federal discretionary grants on behalf of our cities and towns. Working to promote economic vitality. I talked at the beginning about that new role we have as the Economic Development District, looking to bring in money to support good economic development and community development initiatives here in our region. Environmental services. This is an emerging issue for us in some ways. We're working to get our arms around stormwater, and we just initiated a project. We're looking at the feasibility of creating a regional stormwater authority or regional stormwater utility to provide us with more resources to harden and improve our infrastructure, add in green infrastructure, do a variety of things, because we really suffer from some significant flooding here. And I'm sure that resonates with all of you, given what Vermont has had to contend with over the last decade or so.
Yeah.
We're also in the increasingly getting into the waste management space. So we helped establish and we're staffing a small regional waste authority. It's comprised of 14 municipalities at present. We're looking to expand that. We don't own any infrastructure at present. Maybe at some point down the line we will. We closed the state's largest waste to energy plant a couple of years ago. So that's left a real infrastructure deficit, if you will, in the region and in the state. So our municipalities are hauling residential and commercial waste out to other parts of the country to be landfilled or disposed of. And that's proving to be very, very expensive. So right now we got a project underway looking to remove more organics from the residential and commercial waste stream. What more can we do to improve recycling? I imagine we'll be looking at infrastructure a year or 2 down the line as well. Road safety is a significant priority for us. We're seeing this nationally. Unfortunately, the trend in deaths and serious accidents for all users of the road, motorists, pedestrians, bicyclists, motorcyclists, has really gone in the wrong direction over the last 5 years. It's something we're really, really concerned about. So we've created a Vision Zero task force. If you've heard of the Vision Zero term, that's a movement to virtually eliminate traffic-related deaths and serious injuries. Some may say, hey, that's a far-fetched goal. We get it, but we still embrace the vision and we're working hard to achieve it. Related to that, We help our municipalities with complete streets projects, looking at roadways from an economic development, safety, and livability perspective. And we do a lot in the area of multi-use trail projects, especially at the early stages. One example I would cite, you may have heard of the East Coast Greenway. I'm a big fan of your Lamoille Trail. Haven't done it all yet, looking forward to completing it. But the East Coast Greenway runs from Florida to Maine, and about 3,000 miles, kind of the bike equivalent of the Appalachian Trail, if you will. And roughly 200 miles or so go through Connecticut, and we're looking to close a gap in that trail of approximately 12 miles. So we do the initial planning and then work with our towns and the Connecticut Department of Transportation to proceed to design and construction. Bus and rail service is another priority. I think we were very instrumental in helping to increase passenger rail along the Hartford line, which travels from New Haven up to Hartford and then to Springfield, Mass, and then ideally to points north, including in Vermont, all the way to Montreal. Love to see that passenger service become much more robust. And we're also looking for that eastern connection over to Boston. So right now, when I take a train from Hartford to Boston, I need to go first south to New Haven and then get a connection that takes me up through the state of Rhode Island. So it's a 4-hour journey that ideally should be closer to 1 hour.
Matt, can I interrupt with a question?
Sure can.
In all of these priorities, but especially thinking about the transportation ones, do you just do the planning part of it, or do you actually operate the bus service?
Yeah, great question, Senator. So our role is typically at the front end. The planning, advocacy, support, and I'll elaborate during the presentation. I'll give some examples of those planning studies that we conduct. But thinking about our role, and you'll see this throughout the presentation, we provide very little in the area of direct services to the residents. All right, that's an example of how we're different from a county. So we don't have taxing authority. We don't have the ability to issue debt. So we're not necessarily providing the direct services, with a few exceptions, to the residents. What we do is we support our municipalities as well as state agencies or others in providing that direct service. So in most cases, we're a step removed, if you will.
Okay.
That support.
So in the case of that, no, that's helpful. In the case of transportation, so if you're planning for bus routes, do the towns then operate the bus service, or is there another regional entity that's sort of layered in between that does it?
So our state relies on transit districts.
Okay.
For public bus service. And we've got a handful here in our region. The largest is Connecticut Transit. They all have relationships with the Connecticut Department of Transportation, which is where they receive much of their revenue in addition to fares.
Okay.
So that's a great question, and I'll elaborate on that as we move forward.
Great, thanks.
And then public sector workforce development is also a newer initiative for us. So for many, many years, we've been helping to promote workforce development for the private sector, for the nonprofit sector, working with our local workforce development agencies. But, we understand, and I know this well, coming from municipal government, that cities and towns are also facing real challenges with recruitment and retention. Really hard to find experienced building inspectors, tax assessors, etc. So we're doing what we can to engage in that work and to provide grants and to create training, almost apprenticeship type programs for key municipal occupations. Shared services is another focus. We just had a nice workshop back on October 8th. If you're not familiar with the term shared services, what we're talking about there is towns sharing services with a local school district. For example, could be back office or support services really lend themselves well to this, like towns and school districts sharing a finance office or an IT department or a human resources department or a facilities department. Believe it or not, in Connecticut, only a handful of towns do that. You really see a lot of overlap on the municipal side and the school district side. And in my view, that's really a lost opportunity. And two of the towns I worked for, West Hartford and Mansfield, share a number of services with their local and regional school districts. And then towns can also share services between one another. You know, small towns sharing animal shelters, for example, and other services. So we try to promote that. The state of Connecticut offers a grant, a regional performance incentive program grant, which provides 3 years of seed money, if you will, to help establish a new regional initiative. And the councils of governments are the official applicant. And we also have an equivalent on the education side. They're called Regional Education Service Centers, or RESC. So COGS and RESCs are the only entities that are eligible to apply for those RPIP grants on behalf of their members. So we've pursued a number of those successfully over the last 10 years that program has been in place. All right, so I'm gonna proceed to talk a little bit about our governance structure, but why don't I pause there? Any questions, any other questions in terms of what I've covered thus far?
Senator Norris has a question.
Yes, I do have one, Matt, and I'm not sure if I can get this across the way that I want to. This all sounds very nice, simplistic for you, complicated for me.
Yep.
At some point in time, what I'm wondering is, how did you get to this point? I mean, there's state government, there's no county government, but under whose authority, how did you get to this point to allow you to do all of these things that you're doing presently? And what was the time period for that?
Yeah, great question. I'm sorry, is it Senator?
Yes.
Yes, great question, Senator. So it's evolved. You know, it's evolved over 5 decades, but we were established pursuant to state statute. And the roles, responsibilities, the abilities of what councils of governments can do has been expanded over time. So initially, most of us were planning agencies. And then over time, as the State General Assembly and the local planning agencies saw an opportunity to do more, you know, requested that of the state, and our enabling powers and responsibilities were broadened. And in 2015, the state engaged in a consolidation. We went from 15 to the present 9 councils of governments. And the state officially converted all of us from planning agencies. There were a few that were still planning agencies, all to councils of governments. So really our permitted duties, what we're authorized to do, is established under state statute. And then in terms of the programs and services we actually provide, in large part, that's decided by our policy board, which is our main governing body. So the policy board, and that's a good segue to this slide, our policy board is comprised of 41 members. So the chief elected officials in each of the 38 towns, immediately upon once they assume office, they become a member of our board. And then the capital city of Hartford has 3 additional representatives. So there's a little bit of weighted representation for the city of Hartford. I think that's somewhat unique looking across the state. I'm not sure that the other COGs have that. But then...
Can you hold on just a second, Matt? I think that Senator Norris has a follow-up.
Just quickly, Matt, and you may have answered it here. I was just wondering about oversight. So you're saying the policy board has complete oversight over this particular council, and state has no more involvement with this?
No, so we report to the policy board. That's our primary governing body. We also submit an annual report to the state, to our Office of Policy and Management, because we receive, one of our largest revenue sources is we receive a regional service grant from the state. We have to use those funds in accordance with state law and regulation. So we're regularly reporting to OPM. And then on the transportation planning side, which is a little over half of our budget, and about half, most of our staff work in transportation planning in some form or another. We also report on a regular basis to the State Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration regarding the use of those monies. So there's a lot of accounting at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, depending on our functions, the particular function or activity that we're performing.
Thank you.
Yep. So again, we've got our policy board, all of those chief elected officials, they also have the ability to designate an alternate to cover for them when they're not available.
Matt, are those mostly like mayors, or when you say the chief elected official, who is that is that person on the policy board for most of those meetings?
Yeah, there's a real mix. There's a real mix because we've got three primary forms of local government here in our region. So we've got a number of mayors, and obviously the four strong mayor towns are mayor council towns. Their mayor is the chief elected official. A number of our council manager communities also use the title of mayor. Some of the council manager communities use the title council chair. And then we've got 12 or 13, 12. We've got 12 selectmen town meeting communities. So it's the first selectman or the first select woman is the chief elected official.
Got it.
You know, it's a variety based on the form of local government that the municipality utilizes.
Couple of questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator
Yeah.
Harrison.
Thank you. Matt, thank you. This is really interesting. So just a big question, a little question. So the COGS, is every area of the state required to be in a COG?
Yes, so the state, and they did that consolidation back in 2015. So, but I will add, and this gets a little tricky. Membership in the council governments is voluntary. So there is a process whereby a municipality could decide to try to leave a council of governments. Their ability to join another one is very limited. And then the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, and I talked about earlier how 7 of the 9 COGs host an MPO, 1 COG hosts 2. There's a more onerous process to leave an MPO. But technically it can be done.
Okay, and then my other question was about the MPOs. I thought that to be an MPO, you had to have a minimum level of population.
Yes, it's for urbanized areas of 50,000 or more.
Right. So,
You only have 1 MPO in Vermont, as I understand it.
right, exactly, because of our population densities.
Yep.
So that probably wouldn't work. We couldn't do the MPO part.
No, not unless population changed dramatically. But what is considered a best practice, and I think what is considered a best practice is to host the MPO with a COG. So that way you're capturing economy of scale and you're not duplicating resources.
Right, and it makes a lot of sense with just coordinating programs and projects too.
And there's a lot of variety, interestingly, nationally. When you look nationally, like the state of Florida, for example, MPOs are separate from the councils of governments, separate from the regional development organizations. Connecticut has embraced the model, which I think is a good thing, is let's all consolidate those regional entities under one roof.
Right. Right, it's very helpful, thank you.
Sure. So then we got an executive committee, which is a subset of the policy board, performs typical executive committee functions, you know, really helping to vet kind of the strategic direction for the full board itself. We've got a personnel and finance committee. This is common too, with oversight of finance and human resources matters. We've got a legislative committee that's ad hoc. It's every year we do a call for volunteers, and we're looking for policy board members who are willing to help us prepare our annual legislative agenda, for presentation to our state's General Assembly. So we're getting that process underway as we speak, because our General Assembly, as you may know, is going into their long session this year, January through June. I'm going to touch on more committees as I move forward, but these are the ones related to the policy board, which again is our primary governing body. So think of it as roughly analogous to that of a nonprofit board of directors. There's some analogy to a town council or board of selectmen as well. Okay. Well, did I hear a question?
No, it was just a cough. Go ahead.
So our budget, I said at the beginning, we're the largest of the state's 9 COGs, but as a staff, you know, we're small in comparison to a town. So we've got 35 regular positions at present, and our budget is approximately $10 million for this year, for this fiscal year. I think we utilize the same fiscal year. We run from July 1 through June 30th.
Yep. So that's a small staff compared to the towns in Connecticut?
Yes, yes. For example, the town I came from, the town of West Hartford, with a population of 65,000, had about 450 regular employees.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just a totally different scale than Vermont.
Right. And then Mansfield, where I worked, which has a population of 25,000, half of that though is Yukon, has about 130 regular employees. So there can be a large variety. The cities and suburbs that have full-time police departments, as opposed to utilizing state troopers, or even full-time career fire departments, that's really where you see the significant increase in staffing levels.
Right.
So
And do the COGs do any, or the Council of Governments do any law enforcement or public safety?
we support them. We support them, and our COG, I think, has the largest portfolio in that area. We've got a Department of Public Safety and Homeland Security that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
And again, it's mostly in a support role, training, regional equipment, et cetera. So most of our funding, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just in public safety, just to be clear, so is the sheriff a separate entity?
We know we only have sheriffs now. There's been a lot of changes over the last 2 decades, only for service of process.
Okay.
They don't have sheriffs that do law enforcement.
No. So in terms of local law enforcement here in Connecticut, you've got 3 main options. One is a municipal police department. And I would say roughly, maybe a little less than half of our 169 municipalities have that. Actually closer to 40%. And then resident state trooper is a very common model. That's where the town will contract with the Connecticut State Police for dedicated service, where some number of state troopers, usually 1 to 8, depending on the size of the community, will be directly assigned to your community, but they do also work out of the local state police barracks. And then you've got a handful of towns, mainly our smallest towns, that have no dedicated resident troopers. They rely exclusively on the local state police barracks for law enforcement services. Those are the three main models in Connecticut.
Thank you.
Yep. So most of our funding comes from the federal government, from the Federal Highway Administration, passed through the Connecticut DOT, and then the state. We get a regional services grant, and then local dues, interestingly, only comprise about 8% of our revenues. And this budget can really vary from year to year because unlike a town, we don't have a general fund separate from a capital projects fund. Everything runs through this operating budget. So you see here, a little under half of our spending is dedicated for contractual services at almost 4.5 million. And that is for the various planning related projects that we conduct. And I'll elaborate on that as we move forward. Okay, so at CROG, and there's some significant variation regarding this across the state. But our council of governments, we have 4 departments at present. So we've got transportation planning, and I'm going to talk about each one of these in turn. Transportation planning is our largest single department. That's where most of our funding is dedicated towards. Regional planning and development is a department we created 2 years ago. You know, I saw the need when I started. It was something we had in the past and we brought back. These folks really focus on land use and economic and community development. We've got a Department of Administration and Municipal Services that provides a variety of services that I'll elaborate on. And then, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, we've got a small Department of Public Safety and Homeland Security. So let me touch on each one of these. And then I'll pause for each of the 4 departments after I do a brief recap. So you're going to see some names of people and projects. Obviously, you know, not necessarily going to make sense to you, but I think the examples are illustrative. So our transportation planning group, particularly in their role as the MPO, we're responsible for creating, publishing, implementing what we call core plans. And I would imagine that your 11 regional planning agencies have some similar duties. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that's federally mandated, really focused on safety at present, as well as public transit. Related to that, we've got let me back up. The transportation plan, a little bit broader than safety. It's really looking at infrastructure more broadly from a safety perspective, but also from a performance perspective, looking at roads, bridges, highways, etc. And that will include both state and local roads fall within that plan. Then we've got our regional transportation safety plan, which is safety focused, given its title. And we're really working hard to reduce, as I said at the beginning, fatal and serious injuries here in our region. And then the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, that connects directly to that Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That is a rolling list of projects over a 4-year period. It includes both state projects as well as local projects. So we're responsible for managing that TIP in collaboration with the state DOT. This group engages in what we call multimodal planning. Many, if not all of you, may be familiar with that term. That's really looking at various forms of transportation, public transit, micromobility, which is more of a newer development, you know, looking at scooters, e-bikes, etc. Rail, big focus on the Hartford line we've had over the last decade or more. Operations and management, how do we work with our towns and the state to improve how the roads actually perform? We've major focus on trying to bring in federal dollars into our region. We've got this guide to transportation funding sources, which you may want to look at once you get this. Our state operates a very popular grant program to fund transportation projects, road projects, bridge replacements and improvements, et cetera. That's the Local Transportation Capital Improvement Program. And the state funds that by taking the federal dollars and investing them into this LOTSIP program. So instead, in other parts of the country, the MPO may be applying directly to the federal government. It's different here in Connecticut. We're applying to the state through this LOTSIP program. And one of the beauties of the LOTSIP program is the state has streamlined it so that the application process is much easier and cleaner for the MPO and our cities and towns. So we're really work hard to bring in federal transportation dollars here into our region. Here are some examples of just ongoing studies. And again, these named places aren't certainly going to make sense to you. Roundabouts. If you're familiar with roundabouts, you know, especially single lane roundabouts, you know, they're different from traffic circles. They're different from rotaries, very different from the rotaries, the old rotaries you see on Cape Cod that we all experienced growing up. Single lane roundabouts are very suitable for many intersections. So we recently conducted a study, shared it with all of our towns. We looked at 8,000 intersections across our region, identified the top 100 from a crash perspective. Not all of the 38 municipalities had one of those top 100 in their town, you know, fortunate for them. So we also identified the top 3 in each community. And we're promoting that as a preferred form of infrastructure from a safety perspective. So now our towns can utilize that study to apply for state and federal funding to actually install a roundabout. East Coast Greenway study I talked about earlier. That's where we're looking to close that 12-mile gap in the East Coast Greenway here in our region to take it from west of the river to east of the river. Corridor studies. Corridor studies are something we typically have 1 or 2 happening at one time. So a corridor study is where you take a critical review and analysis of a piece of roadway. And we'll do a solicitation on a periodic basis where we're going to our towns, say, give us potential projects here. What's a roadway in your community that you think is problematic or that you would like to see improved primarily from a safety perspective? All right, so then we'll go through a competitive process to select these corridor studies. Normally they take a year or 2 to complete. We typically will engage consulting assistants, traffic engineers, planners, and others to work with our own planners. We've got a couple of engineers on staff as well. So we'll do a very complete and critical analysis of that corridor and then produce a report that our towns can utilize to seek state and federal and local funds to actually design and construct the project. This is an awesome.
Matt?
Yes.
I just want to note the time. I just want to make sure that we're going to be able to get through your slides. We have about 12 or 13 minutes left.
Ooh, thank you.
Yeah. So maybe a little less detail and a little bit more overview.
Okay, lost track of it.
Great, thanks.
So we conduct these various studies here. We've got a variety of committees that support the transportation function. The number one is the Transportation Committee. It's comprised primarily of town engineers, planners, et cetera, which make recommendations to the full board. Do a lot of work in the area of multimodal and complete streets. I'm really going to start to move quickly now in the interest of time. So the second department is regional planning and development. This group really supports town planners, economic development professionals, et cetera. We've got a regional plan of conservation development, if you're familiar with that term, looking at a variety of issues related to housing, transportation, economic development, sustainability, land use. It's a 10-year plan. And then we work with our towns, ideally, to implement projects that fall under that plan. And then on the economic development side, we've got our comprehensive economic development strategy, or the CEDS. And that's a compilation of all the major economic development initiatives here in our region. And we look for federal and state funding to help implement projects under that plan as well. We've got if you're familiar with the term brownfields, contaminated properties, we operate a couple of programs there utilizing federal and state funding, both for assessment and then a revolving loan fund to actually clean up those properties, doing a lot of work in the area of sustainability. We've got a regional planning commission that provides some oversight of the work of that department. We have a quarterly forum for local town planners and economic development folks to share best practices, et cetera. Moving on to our third department, administration and municipal services. This group focuses on cooperative purchasing. We have a longstanding regional purchasing coalition, and actually we support 135 of the state's 169 municipalities at present. We've got a geographic information system that we've operated for a long time, GIS. Capital Region Purchasing Council, I just mentioned. We go out to bid for 14 to 20 times a year. We provide, I apologize for the typo here, some really basic commodities like road salt, fuel oil, gasoline, also more complicated things too, like budget presentation software, fire, EMS software. So we do the due diligence on behalf of our members, and then they can purchase from one of the vendors off of our list, and we do our best to negotiate the best price for them. Similarly, we've got an energy consortium in place for electricity. We've got a job order contracting service in place for small capital projects. So we've been doing this work for decades. Regional IT, I'm sorry, did I hear a question?
Hold on just a second. Yeah, we have a question from Chris Campany, who's one of our regional planning members.
Can you go back to your prior slide?
Back a slide?
Yeah.
This one here?
This is an important point to note for y'all, if you don't know. So notice says they serve 135 of 169 municipalities. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what happens there, right, is the towns that want to participate into this opt into this. They put their own money into this. Those that don't, they don't have to, but they don't also benefit from the service.
Correct.
This is a really important benefit of COG in that the towns have control over spending decisions. They also choose to opt in or not.
Got it, okay.
So just wanted to highlight that. Sorry for what
No, I didn't know that. That's good.
So combining the purchasing power of 135 of the state's 169 towns, we can negotiate a much more competitive price. IT services, I mentioned service sharing. I talked about in the beginning, how we really work with our towns to put together good competitive applications for state funding to create a new regional service program. I talked earlier about our work in the waste management space too. And then, one thing I would mention here. So we have a municipal services committee that is comprised primarily of town managers, assistant town managers, a handful of first selectmen and women meet almost monthly to talk about new regional initiatives and to share best practices. It's a really good forum for towns to talk about something that's working in their town that could potentially work in another. We've got this Human Services Coordinating Council, which meets quarterly. Those are human services directors who get together, talk about things such as homelessness, houselessness, panhandling, fuel assistance, a whole variety of related topics, particularly for members of the population that need those most critical services. And then lastly, we've got our Public Safety and Homeland Security Department, and we've got an Emergency Planning Council. It's a little bit larger, a little bit different from our 38-town footprint. Actually, we serve 41 communities in this regard, and we work very, very closely with the state, with the State Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. We support Region 3. The state has 5 regions. So we provide a variety of training for our members, particularly for law enforcement and for fire and for emergency management. We administer a number of grants. We support a number of local and regional health departments in our region. So we will apply for grants on their behalf and administer them. We'll obtain grants for regional equipment, such as bomb squad equipment, SWAT equipment that is shared by the region. So we'll administer those grant funds. And as I talked about, a variety of training resources as well. We recently conducted a very popular training series for the region's dive team. We also staff the Regional Chiefs of Police Association, and we really work with our towns to help create local CERT teams. If you've heard of CERT, that is a Citizen Emergency Response Team. Those are volunteers in your local communities that will assist during times of need. And I'm sure you've got that model in Vermont as well. So I'll pause there. I'm sorry I lost track of time a little bit, but that's an overview of our 4 departments, and I'm happy to take any other questions you might have in the time remaining.
I'm wondering about accountability and transparency. So the council members are all elected officials in their own municipalities, correct?
Yes.
So is there any way to get somebody removed, or does the town itself have to remove somebody or the voter? How does that work in terms of if somebody's not really doing their job?
Yeah, I mean, yes, haven't faced that issue in the past. You know, as we talked about, there is all of them have the ability to designate an alternate. So, you know, if we were to face a situation, if the primary member was unable to attend on a regular basis, you know, we really would encourage them to appoint an alternate if they haven't done so already, but the vast majority of towns have. And many of our council manager communities, for example, have the mayors there and the council chairs, they have day jobs, et cetera. They don't have the time to attend our meetings, so they'll send their alternate. That's a partial answer to your question.
Well, and the transparency, I mean, when the council meets, are those public meetings? Is there a way for the public to be involved in those meetings?
Yes. So we are subject to freedom of information, and we work hard to comply with that. We are audited as a governmental agency. You know, we produce an annual budget through a public process. So pretty much the many, if not most, of the same forms of accountability, if you will, that our municipalities need to comply with, we need to as well. And then based on our funding sources, as I talked about at the beginning, we also need to report to state agencies and the federal government.
Okay, and is it for Connecticut residents, you mentioned at the top of your presentation that you do some public relations work. Does the average Connecticut know about the councils of governments? Do they know who their council of government is, et cetera?
The average nutmegger?
Nutmegger, okay.
Yes. I would venture to say no, unfortunately.
Okay.
So we're really working hard to change that.
Got it, okay. Senator Harrison.
Just to follow up on the accountability, and actually more to follow up on the financial structure. So if you are able to create a stormwater utility, for example, do you have to create a separate entity to receive that funding?
I imagine we will. You know, we're just beginning that project. Received a state grant to conduct it. I think the state is very, very interested in our work, both in the stormwater management arena as well as waste management. Also received a state grant to help strengthen our regional waste authority. So stormwater management, much more to come. You know, we're in the early stages of that one.
Okay, thank you.
Questions?
Just real quick, I'm still unclear as to this policy board, whether it's a mayor or select board member or whatever. How do they get appointed? Are they elected through the general population, or are they basically appointed through the bodies themselves? How does that work?
So it's pursuant to our bylaws, Representative. So under our bylaws, it states that the chief elected official, once they assume office in their community, they become a member of our policy board. So the vast majority of our towns utilize the same 2-year cycle. There are some variations. So there's some complications with that in terms of who's seated and who's not. But it's pursuant to our bylaws.
And I guess follow-up, is there a extra stipend for that as well?
No, they're all, they don't receive any compensation for this role.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, that's a big ask.
Yes.
Are there other questions for Matt? Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
How did the consolidation in 2015, what were the main considerations and where those lines were drawn? Were they around population centers? Like, do you have any insight into how the lines were drawn for the 9 districts?
Yeah, I do to a certain extent. I was a town manager at the time, and interestingly, our community was affiliated with one of the smaller councils of governments that was dissolved through that process. So they were looking at population centers, but on the periphery, towns had some discretion and gravitated towards that cog that they thought would be most beneficial for their community, particularly in those areas where the cogs were looking to be dissolved. So we were part of an 11, maybe 12 towns, and we split up between 3 different councils of governments.
And when those municipalities that had a say in which one they went in, was it just a vote of the council, or was it a vote of the public to decide which one they went to?
It was a vote of the local legislative body, as well as the COG itself. So the COG had to agree to take them in, and then the local legislative body. So that varies based on the form of government. So selectmen town meeting, they would have needed a town meeting for that purpose.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, this is a lot of information. Are there any further questions? Great. Okay. Thank you so much for your time today, Matt. This is really helpful as we're trying to figure out whether or if we want to make any changes in Vermont, and especially knowing what our sister states in New England are doing is really helpful. If you're able to send the slides along so we can post them and refer to them, that would be great. And we may be back in touch as we move further along with this work.
Great. Well, I'd be happy to do that, Senator. And there are other folks in Connecticut you could look to chat with as well as people nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like we need to do a lot of field trips too.
Would love to host you here if you want to come down.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thanks so much for your time, and have a great afternoon.
All right, you too. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.